Recently, I received this Amigurumi kit to try, so I thought it would be fun to share some of my favorite tips while I'm working on it. These can be a little intimidating at first if you've never made one, but I hope these tips and the general guide will give you the confidence you need to get started. You can really use whatever yarn you like, but the most popular choice for amigurumi is 100% cotton for two main reasons. One, it has great stitch definition, and number two, it has the least amount of elasticity compared to other yarn, so it's more likely to hold its shape. But because of that lack of elasticity, it can also be really hard on your hands and wrists, so if you have any kind of joint issues or arthritis, I'd recommend you choose a cotton blend. These tend to have a little bit of acrylic or polyester added to them to help give it a little bit more stretch, which is a lot better on your hands. But like I said, you can really use whatever you like. Just be aware that the different yarn types behave differently. But my biggest tip is just to see what the pattern recommends and get as close to that as you can. If you're finding it difficult to find the same brand that's being recommended, then YarnSub is a great resource. You can plug in the name of the yarn and see what is a good substitution. Which leads to the next tip regarding hook size choice. As a general guide, you're always going to want to use a smaller hook size than the recommendation on the yarn label. And that's because the goal here is to work the stitches tightly enough that the stuffing doesn't show through. So if you use the recommended hook size, you're going to have a lot of gaps. This can take a little bit of trial and error because all of our tensions are different. So a good place to start is to go 2 sizes smaller than the recommended hook size. So for example, if the label recommends a 5mm hook, go down 2 full sizes to a 3mm hook. If your label recommends a couple of sizes, then use the smaller number and subtract 2 from that one. Now it's time to decide if you want to do yarn over or yarn under. Now typically with a single crochet, we're doing a yarn over, but for amigurumi, a standard practice is to do what's called a yarn under. There are a couple of reasons it's so popular with amigurumi. One, it gives a really pretty X effect to your stitches. And secondly, it makes your stitches a lot tighter, which helps prevent that gappiness and the stuffing showing through. To do our typical yarn over single crochet, you go into the stitch, wrap the yarn over the top of the hook and pull through, yarn over, pulling the yarn over the hook and pull through. And you get your typical V-stitch single crochet. Before a yarn under, you go in with the yarn under the hook, you pull through, and then again from under, you pull the yarn through. And you're going to get a much tighter stitch this way and more of an X effect the more that you make them. But this can be really hard on your joints and your wrists, and it's going to make a very tight stitch. Now, the perfect compromise for this is to do a yarn under, yarn over. And this is the most popular way of going about this. So you go in, the yarn is under the hook, just catch it and pull it through. And then complete the stitch by doing a regular yarn over. So now the yarn is over the hook. We're wrapping it around and over and pulling through. This is still going to give you an X effect, but it's a little bit looser and easier on your wrists. So again, go through, yarn under the hook, just catch it and pull it through, and then go back to normal with yarn over and pull through. Now, I've heard from a lot of you that your biggest obstacle with starting amigurumi is the magic ring, and I do have a tip on how you can bypass that completely. Instead of doing a magic ring, create a slip knot on your hook, wrap the yarn around your fingers, pull the yarn through the center, and take the tail and the extra yarn and just pull on it to tighten to form a slip knot. And chain 4. Close with a slip stitch. And as you're doing your very first round, you're just going to make sure that the tail is carried along with your stitches. So I'm going in and making a single crochet, and my tail is sort of sandwiched into the stitch as I'm making that single. I'm just carrying the tail along. And then when I'm finished with the round, I just pull on that tail to tighten the center. The basic premise of making an amigurumi toy is to work single crochet rounds to form your shapes. You can do this two ways, creating completed rounds or continuous rounds. With completed rounds, you'll start with a chain 1 and then end with a slip stitch to join the round together. Then repeat each round the same way. This is very beginner friendly because it's easier to keep count of your stitches, but it will cause a noticeable seam line. The second option, and the more popular one in amigurumi, is to work continuously where you don't end each round, you just continue on working into the next stitch with your single crochet. This is creating a spiral effect with your stitches, and this will be really important to know later when we talk about color changes. This may seem like a small tip, but this is so important. Use a stitch marker. It is so easy to lose track when you're working in continuous rounds with amigurumi, and whether you use a piece of yarn or a stitch marker, it's going to make a difference. So either put it into the very first stitch or the last stitch, whatever works best for you. For some reason, I like to put it into the very last stitch that I've made. I do get a lot of questions on the stitch markers that I use. This is called the Crochet Dude stitch marker or something like that. I'll leave a link in the description box. You may not like this too much because there isn't a fastener on this, and so you have to really pay attention because otherwise it will slip out on you if you're not careful. Increasing and decreasing plays a huge role in amigurumi, and we know how to do increases very easily. We just add an extra single crochet whenever needed, and it's really hard to spot out those increases when you see the whole project. But with decreases, that's a different story. With a regular decrease, they're a little bit more eye-catching, so I recommend trying the invisible decrease. The classic way of doing a decrease would look something like this. You go into the stitch, pull your yarn through, go into the next stitch, pull your yarn through, yarn over and pull through all 3 stitches. But with the invisible decrease, instead you'll just go through the front loop of the first stitch and then into the front loop of the second stitch. Do your yarn over or yarn under depending on what kind of stitch you're making, and pull the yarn through the first 2 loops. You have 2 loops on your hook, yarn over, and pull through the remaining 2 loops. This is going to fill in that gap a little bit more and make a tighter join. As you're working your rounds, you may notice that instead of doing a really nice circle, it's looking a little bit more geometric. That's just because you're doing the increases in the same space. So an easy fix to this, if it's really bothering you, is to switch it around a little bit. So instead of starting with the single crochets and then doing the increases after, reverse it. Start with your increase and then do your single crochets after. So for example, I'm on a round here where I'm going to be doing 3 single crochets with an increase. I'm going to do it in the reverse order. I'm going to do an increase and then do my 3 single crochets and repeat that all the way around. That's helping to put those increases in a different spot, which is going to round out my circle again. A little mini tip here, keep an eye on that initial tail. Before things go too far, go ahead and weave that in. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, you just don't want that center to widen up on you later when you start stuffing it. What I like to do is just find a little stitch with the little loop that you've formed, just feed your yarn through it and tighten to make a knot. Then I'm just going to leave the tail in there and it'll be camouflaged by the stuffing. Here's a little tweak to a classic color change that I recently learned that I really like. Instead of finishing the last loop of the stitch with your new color, you can instead just take your crochet hook and go through the 2 loops on the side and then pull the yarn through those instead. At this point, you can pull on that tail for the previous color and you're ready to work with your new color. If you're working tapestry crochet or stranded crochet, this kind of color change works really well for that too. I'm getting ready to do a color change here. So I just remove the hook from the yarn, going into the 2 strands that created the single crochet, bringing in my new color, and then just pulling on the old color to remove that loop. And now I'm just going to continue on with the new color. And I'm not snipping the yarn because I'm going to be using it again here in just a moment. Switching back to the orange, I'm going to drop the white, remove the hook from the yarn, bring in the orange and pull through, pull the strand for the white, and continue on. I'll be doing a video about tapestry crochet here in the coming weeks, so I'll go into more detail about this. If you're working a pattern that involves stripes, it can be a real frustration when you're working with continuous rounds. The end of the stitch will always be up one stitch higher compared to the beginning. I did a video all about this that I'll go ahead and link to at the end of this video, but in short, the only way to get a truly straight stripe is to work your toy with completed rounds instead of continuous rounds. For this toy, when I started the next round with a new color, I started with a slip stitch instead of a single crochet. This is to help lessen the height between the two rounds, but you can see it's not perfect. Now this one that I did a couple of years ago, I started with continuous rounds, and then when I came to the striping part, I switched over to completed rounds. And as you can see, the completed rounds did help to keep those lines straighter, but there's a clear seam line. So really, my biggest tip is to experiment and use whatever method you think will serve you best for the type of toy you're making, and more importantly, what you're willing to live with. Whenever you get ready to fasten off, always leave a nice long tail. The pattern will usually tell you to do that, but even if you don't think you'll need it, it might come in handy later when you join your pieces together. When it comes to stuffing your pieces, your goal is to stuff firmly but not bloated. Over time, your stuffing does deflate, so you do want to add more than you think, but you don't want to do it to the point that it's distorting your stitches. This will take some practice, but you'll get a better sense of it the more projects that you make. I'm using the filler that came with the kit, but usually I just use an inexpensive polyfill, which I get at my local Walmart or craft store. Now when it comes to stuffing the arms and legs, just keep in mind how you want that piece to lay. For example, with the arms, you would only fill about 2/3 of the way so that they'll lay nicely to the side. And same goes for the legs. If you're wanting the toy to be able to sit, ease off on filling the stuffing all the way to the very end. Again, you want to be stuffing firmly, but you want to keep those joints in mind. There are a lot of little tools that will help you with stuffing your toys. Your bag of polyfill might include a wooden dowel, but any kind of wooden stick will really help, as long as it doesn't have a finish to it where it's slick. I found the wooden chopsticks that you get when you do takeout works really well for this. Lately, I've been using a blender stump that I got in my drawing section at the craft store. These work like a charm. Tweezers are always a great option. The rubbery end of your crochet hook if you have an ergonomic hook. Using the eraser at the end of your pencil. Anything that has a bit of rubber to it or a little bit of tooth is really going to help out. And now the part that most of us dread the most, and that's the joining of the pieces, because we've done all of this hard work and we don't want to screw it up, right? But the biggest tip I can give here, a generalized one, is that you really do want to take the time to pin your pieces together. It makes such a difference. The order in which you seam your pieces together is a personal preference. A good starting point is to see what the pattern is recommending and then go from there. As far as seaming things together, there are a lot of great methods out there, and I really don't have a certain technique that I would say is better than the other, but a good place to start is to watch this video by Planet June, where she shares how to do a seamless join. Basically, you enter your needle behind the stitches on the top piece and then re-enter your needle back into the same spot that you entered in the previous stitch below. When you pull tightly on this, the stitch virtually disappears. Sight measuring is the easiest way to make sure that your pieces align on your toy. Again, pins are your best friend because you can keep moving things around before you have to commit. Embroidering your piece can feel really intimidating, but again, this is something that just takes some practice. And speaking of practice, this is my biggest tip. Make a quick swatch for yourself and practice on that before committing to your toy. There's nothing worse than redoing something in the same place over and over again. Your yarn is going to start showing signs of that wear and tear, and you're going to be really disappointed with the results. Most of the time you'll need a thinner yarn for your embroidery, and you can easily find embroidery floss at your local craft and superstore. If you already have the yarn in the color you need, then dividing the plies and using one or two of the strands works really well too. One thing that can be really cute and give your toy a little bit more personality is to do some highlights around the eyes. Depending on the size of your toy, you can use either embroidery floss or the strand of yarn that you're working with. I'm going to add a little knot at the end of this, but I'm going to hopefully tuck it inside the toy. I'm just trying to give myself a little bit of an anchor, and then coming up behind the eye. And then depending on where you put it, will give the impression of a direction that your toy may be looking. I've got a long piece, so I'm just going to travel over to the other side, trying to match the same kind of location. So overall, I'd say this is a well done kit. The instructions were clear. There were more than enough supplies, which was a relief because the cats found the orange yarn and unraveled it all around the house. I'd say the quality of the yarn was nice. It did have a tendency to untwist into strands if you overworked it too much, but that's an issue I have with cotton anyway, so I wasn't too surprised with that. Now, although this is marketed as a beginner kit, I would not consider this a beginner-friendly project. They've done a really good job of trying to make it as easy to learn as possible. They have very clear instructions as well as video tutorials available online, but it's still a lot to take in as a beginner. If you're an experienced beginner and you've done some amigurumi before, then yes, this would be something you could have fun trying to do. But having said all of that, the instructions were clear and the toy is adorable. I'd definitely try another kit if I was wanting to have that convenience of everything provided. So if this looks like something that you'd like to try, you can find a link in the description box below. I do believe they're offering a 10% discount, but if not, let me know and I'll follow up on that. I'm not making any money from you buying this product. They gifted it to me and I thought it would just be a fun way to demonstrate some of my tips. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.